Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Miss Evelyn. Super appreciate you all being here today. And I know we were supposed to meet about a month ago and I had some technical difficulties. So again, I appreciate Miss Evelyn and the group here for pivoting very quickly and utilizing that time appropriately, and then reconvening today for our first session of the Color of Law Book Club. I think since we have such a small group here today and we have a few new folks, I want to do just a little bit of a roundtable introduction. So as Miss Evelyn noted, my name is Maja Sandstrom. I am a part of the Anti-Racist Conversations group here. And I'm also a volunteer with moveon.org. I, in my day-to-day life, am a resource manager for KPMG, which means I get to help place people who are already employed in roles that we have available for them. So it's a little more complicated than I made it sound, but that's kind of my 9 to 5. I live in the city of Chicago with my dog Domingo and my senior cat Charlie. He's about 11 years old and Domingo is about 4. So I think that's me in a nutshell. I'll maybe send it off to Larry. Are you open to letting us know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Larry Holman. I live in Northeast Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm retired from the military, but I've been retired a lot longer than I was in. I was in the military from 1958 to 1982, and I have been retired since. And I've done a lot of things. I've been very active in the veterans community over the last 20 years or so, and I'm very concerned about our I was in the Vietnam War and spent a couple of tours over there, and I'm very concerned about where our country is now. And I would have expected. We recently celebrated the Independence Day, and I was thinking about that and thinking, well, independence for whom? When we got the Declaration of Independence and later on the Constitution, that only applied to white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male landowners. That's all. That's all it applied to. And so, our history is not good as a nation. We have a lot of things to atone for, and I would like to, and it really puzzles me as to why anybody in the nation would want to roll back the calendar to 1860 or before that. And so I want to see us keep moving forward. And so these kind of discussions are really critical to making that happen. So thank you very much for your indulgence, and I'll pass it on to Melissa next.
Hi, everybody. My name's Melissa. I am originally from the Midwest, moved to Phoenix, and now my husband and I are in Cortez, Colorado to escape the heat a little bit. So I come to you with the black-chinned hummingbirds buzzing all around me, so I'm kind of in my happy place right now. I learned of this group through a mutual friend of Miss Evelyn's and got involved with this, and echo what Larry said in terms of these conversations are really important. Also Move On volunteer. I'm fortunate enough right now to have been able to retire early, and I'm trying to use that time to pay it forward in organizations that I feel passionate about. I volunteer with Move On and a Master Gardener program that is involved with sustainable landscaping and environmental issues. And then I'm a hospice volunteer. So I will turn it over to E. Blank, Professor Emeritus.
Sorry, I realized I didn't need to make that title sound so highfalutin. But until about a year ago in May, I taught at Howard University in the economics department. And since then, you know, I'm trying to spend time with my husband and preserve democracy. I won't go into how, but I am. And I unfortunately I haven't read the book. I just saw this, and I may have read the book, but it's been so long I can't remember. Let's see, who else is there? Larry, Melissa, Suzanne.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne. I live in Fairburn, Georgia. I'm not going to claim Atlanta anymore, Miss Evelyn. You know, I was called out before, but I live in Fairburn, Georgia, which is about 20 minutes, 30 minutes south of Atlanta. And I have been a resident here for over 30 years. I am a middle school teacher. I've been doing that for 28 years. I've been married for 30 years. I have 3 adult children. I have been involved with, actually, I became involved with anti-racist conversations by being a Move On member. So I met Miss Evelyn through Move On. And I'm also a volunteer with the Color of Change. I've been growing my legs again, getting into phone banking. Had the phone slammed down in my face about 10 times. It's difficult, but I got to get back up on the horse because democracy, we have got to save democracy, but we're going to move forward. And I saw this book, so I've been reading it, and I'm interested to hear the conversation that surrounds this book. So thank you for having me. And I will call on Bob.
Bob's got to get organized here. I'm Bob Schroyer. I live in McHenry County. I met Miss Evelyn, 7 or 8 years ago, just shortly after we had this horrible election. And I've been active in both the Indivisible group, the Move On group, the County Democratic Party. I'm a precinct committeeman. And I cause as much trouble as I can afford to these days. I am retired in 2019, just before COVID hit. So the first 2 years of my my retirement were a little less than I expected and planned on. But I have had a lifelong history of being involved in politics and Democratic Party elections and stuff. So I've got more time now, and I put in more time than my wife would like me to be doing. But she's my new boss, so I have to be careful about that. I'm anxious to hear a conversation. I actually have the book. I bought it some time back, started reading it, and I just couldn't keep up the energy. But I did see on WTTW, Chicago's public television, a documentary about the home system that was in Chicago in the 40s. Really well done with lots of facts and stuff. So I'm assuming that that's a part of what this conversation is about, and I'm anxious to be a part of it. Thank you.
And I'll just chime in one more time. You know, I'm the organizer of this event, but I thought it was kind of interesting that Bob would say Miss Evelyn, because he's never done that before. It happened on Juneteenth. He actually heard someone else say it. And so I guess I'm Miss Evelyn forever now. Thank you, Bob. Take it away, Maja.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing a little bit and introducing yourself. Just as a quick aside, this meeting is being recorded. So apologies for not noting that before we did our intros, but you know, just keep that in mind if you don't want to be on camera. But I do appreciate everyone being on camera and sharing their spaces and experiences with us today. So with that, as Miss Evelyn and a few of us have mentioned, today we're going to discuss the first 6 chapters of The Color of Law. by Richard Rothstein. And, you know, as Miss Evelyn kind of alluded to, and I think we were holding back a little bit in our intros, we're kind of focusing this discussion today on this book and on the housing crisis, housing injustice history of the United States. So while other topics might come up, let's try to keep ourselves on track, on the rails, and, you know, keep any kind of ancillary discussions that are getting a little bit too off the rails. Well, let's try to keep ourselves focused and talking about the issue at hand. Since we're a fairly small group, if you have a question or would like to interject, you know, feel free to stay off mute or use the Zoom tools to raise your hand. If I'm not calling on you, Miss Evelyn, I'm going to rely on you to interject and make sure that everyone's able to speak their mind in real time. This is a safe space and we want it to remain that way. So, you know, if you hear of any, if you hear of anything untoward, if you are being made to feel uncomfortable, let's call it out in the moment. Let's address it right away. It might even be me that's saying something. So, you know, let's keep each other honest and on track. So just a little bit of a note about my cognitive style. I've mentioned this before in our previous book clubs, but I have aphantasia, which means I essentially have no mind's eye. I can't really picture things in my mind, and I'm a global aphantasic, so that means I can't hear anything. I can't kind of recreate any sort of those sensations that a lot of folks have the ability to create just using their mind. So that also kind of affects my memory. Because it's been about a month since we were supposed to have this book club, I think, Bob, you kind of hit on it a little bit too. This is a pretty dense read. It's not purely academic, but man, it kind of feels like that sometimes. So we're going to keep this discussion kind of fairly broad. I have a few quotes that we can pull from and some areas or some guides that we can use to help push us along if we're struggling. But I really just want to hear, firstly, main takeaways from your experience, either reading this entire book or a chapter or two, or maybe even the first 6 or 7 chapters as we have on the agenda for today. I can go ahead and get us kicked off and started. I knew of redlining as a concept before I read this book. I was not aware that redlining was created by a government program. It wasn't just some housing association from some southern town that created a blueprint for racist housing actions. It was top down. It wasn't bottom up. So I think we're going to hear over and over again examples from this book, maybe from our own personal lives, of how the United States government has really created this environment of housing disparity and propped up the white experience while dampening the African-American, Black American experience. I also saw over and over again how there's a self-feeding cycle of logic that often comes up, and while it's unfounded and it's not scientifically based, it keeps coming back to itself to justify itself. So we'll talk about that in a little more depth later. Ultimately, I think what Richard is trying to get across in this book is it's not the oppressed who are going to fix this problem. Just like racism in general, right? The oppressed aren't responsible for and cannot fix the problem. It's those of us who have the privilege and the power, the positions, who can change policy because this is a policy level, it's policy level discrimination. And while it was started in a time where maybe discrimination was widely quote unquote accepted, we're decades and decades beyond that, and we're still seeing all of the same segregation and discrimination happening today that was happening 60, 70, 80 years ago. So I'll cool it there. Does anyone else have any just kind of general thoughts, takeaways that they would like to share from what they've read so far?
Can we make comments? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, say what you're gonna say.
Can we make comments based not just on the reading, but on our own experience? Or do you want to confine it to the book?
Yeah, no, please feel free to jump in with your academic, personal, professional experience. We want to hear, even if you haven't been able to read the book.
I am not sure that. I think that there are people for whom discrimination is still okay. And of course, they rationalize it based on some of the circumstances that we're going to be discussing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the thing that jumped out at me was, oh my gosh, this is illegal. Nobody realizes the Fifth Amendment, written by our founding fathers, prohibits the federal government from treating citizens unfairly. Nobody knows that. I didn't. So, and the 13th Amendment, adopted immediately after the Civil War, prohibits slavery or in general treating African Americans as second-class citizens, while the 14th Amendment, also adopted after the Civil War, prohibits states and local governments from treating people either unfairly or unequally. And that's just why I got out the preface. So that jumped out at me about how they just plowed all over that, and so what I'm saying is that we pick and choose in this country what we're going to use to employ what. And I'll just say this, it's in line with the book, now they have struck down affirmative action. They have people going after small Black business grants. And they used an 1866 law from the 13th Amendment to say that these women, I can't think of the name, who were giving grants to small businesses, not only Black businesses, but women's business, small business, was illegal. But yet it was been for maybe 60, 70 years, they trampled all over the Fifth Amendment and the 13th, 14th Amendment, which made housing segregation illegal. So you saw what I'm saying, the government picks and chooses what they're going to do. It depends on what their objective is. So that jumped out at me. And also, as I was reading, I was very surprised to know that public housing was really originally for working class whites and middle class whites. That really surprised me. Also, nothing that jumped out at me, because I saw Harlem River houses, I think in the first chapter, where people had to be in a lottery to get into that housing, because it was Harlem River housing in Manhattan, and there was a Williamsburg section for the whites in Brooklyn. And it jumped out at me because my mother grew up in Harlem River houses, and my aunt says she moved from there when she was a little girl. When she was 10, she said they moved. I asked her about Harlem River houses. One thing I like about Black people, especially my parents' generation, was they made the best of things. They didn't care if people told them they were second-class citizens. That's one thing we have to get straight. Nobody didn't care if people told them they were second-class citizens. They never let people define them and who they were. They knew who they were. They didn't care what the white man told them. And my grandparents grew up in Jim Crow South, and my parents grew up in, segregated North. I asked my aunt about living in Harlem River houses, and she said that was the best experience. She said we were thriving. And she said when you made a certain income, you had to move out. But she said the people, we were neighbors, we cared about each other, we thrived, and we had a lot of success coming out of that. So I just wanted to preface that just because they cram us in somewhere, it's that's what I got from the book. I had to bring that up. It's not all gloom and doom. They made the best of things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, what I really jumped out at me was the educational aspect of how everything happened. It's almost like there was a trend that they educate themselves on what to do to keep the oppression in place. And that oppression was evident in the textbooks because there was almost like a complete elimination of anything related to the fact that this is what we're going to do to the African Americans or the Black community. They just didn't talk about it. They didn't want us to know that was what was going on. And that way it could remain kind of like normalized. It could be just the natural, this is the way it is. That's where you belong and this is where we belong. We don't have to discuss it because there's nothing written about it. We don't have to make sure that the kids in the school grow up and they can do better because we're not going to write about it. That seems to have been one of the overriding policies, no matter what it was. If the law was not legal in this particular area, they made it or they created a law to make it legal. But they only talked about it among themselves, though. So that's the it's almost like the overriding umbrella really was education, but not for the African American.
But yeah,
Make sure we're talking about it.
I
Well,
like
and
it. Mhm.
go ahead, Suzanne.
But it's also, I like what Ms. Evans saying, so what she and I are saying, yeah, what you're saying is, yeah, thank you for bringing that point up. But like I was saying so it kind of goes hand in hand. They had that plan, we didn't know anything about it. But then from my point of view, and my mom, my aunt, uncle, grandparents, their attitude was, well, especially my grandparents, their attitude was, this is our lot, but we're gonna make the best of it. I don't care if we don't know what you're doing, we're gonna still hold on to our humanity, our dignity, and our goals, so it goes hand in hand. They didn't know, my grandparents probably didn't know. They said, "Price, what the heck is this?" But we're gonna make the best of things. So they didn't tear up it's not like now, they didn't tear up the projects. They didn't tear up where they lived. They respected where they lived and they were safe where they lived. It's not like what we've seen the last, 30 years ago with dangerous because they put drugs in there. It was actually, they were happy. I mean, it sounds crazy, but they were happy.
Yeah, and I think too,
Well-
in conjunction with that, I think there is a resilience that people will never understand that happens in the African American community.
Mhm.
There is a community that is you just cannot penetrate it hardly with negative information, because I grew up with the mentality that you tell me I can't and it's positive, I can. I can, and I did, and I will. That's just the way that it was. I don't remember my parents focusing on what went on out there. They focused on what's going on in the community and how can we help each other? Not how can I help myself? How can we help each other? Yeah.
Melissa, I see your hand.
Yeah, it was just interesting because as Suzanne was talking about cherry picking policy, and then Miss Evelyn was talking about, changing policy as we go. I think that was my biggest takeaway because I worked for a nonprofit for a lot of years that worked in urban revitalization. And so very familiar with redlining and how it literally cut communities in half. Where I worked was in Columbus, and it was a prime example of how they just like cut a community off. But I think then the thing that surprised me the most, or maybe not surprised me, but appalled me the most, was that as our government, local, regional, national, cherry picked the rules that they wanted to enforce, as that resilience in the African American community reared up, then they changed things or, shifted things in order to keep the oppression there. And I mean, just thinking in terms of generational wealth, that I just find it very, when I run into people who say, "Oh, well, that's not my fault. That I wasn't alive then," but it's like, but you are benefiting. I am benefiting from just the generational wealth, if nothing else. I mean, and that is a huge thing that, we're responsible for fixing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And think about the burdens, right, that we've heard about now. And I think it was Frank Stevenson is the main character in chapter 1. He had to come from poverty in the South. And only because we had an economic necessity because of what World War II, he was provided the opportunity to move to Richmond, California. Only because we didn't have enough white labor because they were all off fighting the war. Then we allowed women and Black Americans to join this workforce. In that time, we as a government, right, said, well, we need to provide these people housing, but we really only need to provide housing for the white folks.
That's it. Mhm. Mhm.
We need to only provide permanent housing for the white folks. The Black folks we're going to put in temporary housing, which means less quality materials, which means less services, which means they're put next to industrial corridors within them and not out in the nice white suburbs that we imagined for ourselves. So there's hurdle after hurdle, right? The resilience is required of all Black people to live in this world. There's no leg up. And then we get to the financial institutions, where we get to talk about those and how the government simply just would not loan to Black folks. Oh, and by the way, if you're a white person who wants to sell your home to a Black person, you can't do that either. So the government sanctioned segregation. It wasn't just in, oh, well, we'll provide you housing, but it's going to be temporary and it's going to be really terrible. Well, we'll provide loans, but only for white people who are going to be in single family homes. We'll provide public housing, but firstly, it's going to be to white populations. And then secondly, when we're forced to create public housing for Black populations, we're going to use less quality materials. And we're not going to build up to code. We're not going to put parks nearby. We're not going to provide services. So talk about that generational wealth. How about generational security, psychological safety? All of that, health, right? Economic mobility, that's all couched in this idea of segregating white and Black people. Bob, Larry, anything else to add as far as just general thoughts?
Some things popped in my mind. Unfortunately, I haven't read the book yet, but I was thinking about a comment that was made earlier about this is a problem that the privileged have to solve, and that the oppressed cannot solve. But I think I think about President Obama's election and how that was a wonderful thing. Two terms he served. He got reelected and served 2 terms, and that was wonderful. But there was such a huge backlash, it seems to me, among the minority of this country that didn't vote for him. That it seems like they are such a powerful minority in the sense that they must be the people that have all the money, because and they must be the people that benefited from all these discrimination that happened decades and centuries before. And I'd like to understand more clearly what the connection is between this conspiracy to keep the Black people suppressed as long as possible, as much as possible, and the oligarchy, because the United States has not been, at least for the last decade or so, a democratic republic. It has been an oligarchy. And so my concern is, what can we do? What are the links between what happened there and this oligarchy that has the power to pull all the strings, and that still to this day, almost every law that's written is written because these people want it to be written. The small handful of people with all the money, they want those laws to be written, and that's why they're written. And that's why we know we live in an oligarchy. I think Stiglitz and people like that have written books about 10 years ago about how we are not, and what Citizens United did, that Supreme Court ratified that. They've basically made it permanent. They basically said that whoever has the money can own the country. That money is speech, and that corporations are people. And yet, no corporations have ever been sentenced to jail that I know of. And so they pay a little fine, it's written off as a cost of business when they get caught. But their executives and shareholders continue to thrive. And so what is the connection? Thank you.
Can I respond to that? I know you're going to have a great response, Maya, but could I respond to that just in my own little educational mind here? Your comments took me all the way back to the book club that we had a couple of years ago, I think it was, caste system. And then I just pulled this book off my shelf. It's called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibrahim X. Kendi. It's always been that way from the beginning. And there's a lot of discussion in between that comment that I'm making, but it's all here. And it's all in the minds of the people who believe they were the first people here, but they were not. They came in with a force, moving anything out of the way that was not like them. And so from the beginning, their focus was power, control, elimination. That's my take on it.
I've got piles of stuff in my head running around. The first one is the great 50s. I went through grade school in the 50s, and I thought it was the most wonderful time in my life. I'd ride my bicycle whenever I wanted, played Little League baseball, never had any fears, never even heard of anybody getting killed. No negative things at all in my life. And I still see people who post stuff on Facebook and stuff about the great years, and I think it's a fantasy of what MAGA, whatever the hell I call it, is. We want to go back to that. We want to go back to the time when white men ran everything. You never think about a white man not being on the presidential list or in the Supreme Court or whatever. I mean, you just didn't. It didn't make any sense. And I had no idea of the kind of reality that was going on for people of color. When I started learning, one of the things I did, when I got rejected by the draft board because of a bad knee, I couldn't be sent to Vietnam, which was actually a blessing. But so I volunteered to be a visa volunteer. Instead of going to Peace Corps and helping some country afar, I thought I should be working in this country. What the heck? And what I learned was that and I was sent into a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, all minority-based Spanish and Latino and Black and all kinds of complications. What I was sent in to help them get better and help themselves. What I learned is there's nothing wrong with these people. They are just fine. And like Miss Evelyn said, you know, people lived in a public housing project and they were happy. They made the best of what was available. And they watched after each other's kids. They watched after their neighborhood. They had block parties for themselves. They had all these I mean, wonderful life. I really enjoyed being in that community. And I learned a lot. And I learned there's nothing wrong with these people. It's the damn system that drives everything away from them and keeps them from accumulating anything positive. So anyway, I have a lot of history, a lot of complications, I'm astounded at how these policies came from the very top. The story of the documentary I said about Chicago was where a few white men were able to loan money to people, to black people, to buy houses for $20,000, $30,000, and the constraints on that. I mean, they had to pay 3 times as much money as a white person would have to pay over time, and if there was any growth of wealth of that property, they didn't get it. The people who loaned them the money got that. All they ever got back was the money they actually put into it or that they owed. I mean, it was just astounding how crazy that was. And it was going on when I was a youngster, enjoying Little League and riding my bike everywhere and thinking that the world was just a beautiful place. So anyway, that's my history.
It's bringing up a couple of things back to mind for me, Bob. Larry, first, to answer your question, capitalism and the strict adherence to it allows us to enslave people for many, many years in brutal conditions, and allows us to think that it's okay because we're getting the cheapest labor and the most profit. Capitalism also drives organizations like the Federal Housing Association to provide loans to white families and not to black families. And to Bob's point, in Chicago, I think they probably cover this in that documentary you were talking about, but in Chicago specifically, I think it was around the 1940s. I'd have to look up the specifics in the book here, but Chicago was, they were not forced to, but the Supreme Court found that their discriminating housing policies needed to cease. And the Chicago Housing Authority, instead of saying, okay, let's build public housing or single family homes for our Black population, we're just not going to build anything at all. So that's, that's not capitalism ruling, that's racism ruling. But all under the guise of keeping the wealth within white communities. And Bob, you brought to mind the revelation I had while reading this book, in that a lot of our communities were not explicitly segregated before the federal government stepped in. Some were, there was obviously some really deep divided segregation that was happening within the country just because of standard hat racism. But oftentimes, poor whites and Black folks and brown folks were living together. And it wasn't until the federal government stepped in to provide housing where they explicitly said, because they put it into policy, that racial harmony, meaning the segregation of races, was required for them to build housing.
I remember I used to,
logic. Yeah, go ahead. You blank. Go ahead.
I just remember assigning an article in a course that actually, I'm not saying I agree with this, but this article pointed out that it was during the Roosevelt administration that there was this explicit segregation And so, and also unions during this time were horribly discriminatory. White unions wouldn't even let black people in. Um, well, I don't entirely disagree with it, but the article claimed that the origin of the racial of the of the of many of the problems that black people had were during the New Deal. I mean, I don't agree that that was the origin, but it certainly didn't help any.
Yeah, based
That
on
was, that
chapter
was the
2 of
policy
the book.
origin. Sorry, Miss Evelyn, go ahead.
Yeah, based on chapter 2 of the book, though, and based on Rothstein's extensive research, I think that is the case, though. I think that's the truth, because it says under these, and I wrote this down because it was like mind-boggling too, because I think we give so much credence to President Roosevelt, but it says under these social programs of the 1930s, the government constructed segregated housing and only built white housing in white neighborhoods all across the United States. The FHA was just like doing its due diligence to keep the segregated populations segregated. And if there was any semblance of someone wanting to reverse that, it just wasn't even, it wasn't conversational. So yeah, I was like really, I never heard that about Roosevelt, but he was very strategic in the laws that were passed and accepted throughout the nation. And like I said earlier, if they weren't at play in certain locations, they could easily be intersected into the policies, just because they're doing it elsewhere.
You know what, Miss Evelyn, I'm like you, I was very surprised, and they talked about it, they talked about that neighborhood composition rule, federal housing policy reflect the previous racial composition of their neighborhoods, and projects in white areas can only house white tenants. Those in African Americans can only house African Americans. And I was surprised. It was a PWA housing authority. I was very surprised, like you, because we do know that President Roosevelt was very instrumental in bringing us out of the Depression with Social Security. And so I was so surprised that he would enforce racial housing segregation. That was really surprising. I remember my mother always saying she liked President Roosevelt. She was born in 34. So, by the time he died, she was probably in 6th or 7th grade. So she remembers him. She remembered him. And that is very surprising. And then Eisenhower also was good at reinforcing the segregation by telling people, don't move too quickly to desegregate housing. Yeah, I was just as surprised.
And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And the Federal Housing Administration under Dwight Eisenhower,
Yeah.
that apparently was responsible. They just went right through black neighborhoods, and one author said that was more responsible for it destroyed more black communities than urban renewal did. So the federal housing, the Federal Highway Administration, building those federal highways did a lot of harm to the black community.
Yeah, I think Atlanta is probably one of the best examples of that. To where before that interstate was built, there seems to have been kind of like what Maja was saying earlier, kind of a thriving of the communities together, and yet that wasn't necessarily what people wanted. So they constructed that thoroughfare right in the middle of that community, and since that time, there's been an uptick in housing on this side of the track highway, and over here a decline. But before there wasn't that decline.
Is that the neighborhood that where Martin Luther King Jr.'s church is? Because I remember I was on the civil rights bus tour through there, and they said that one of those neighborhoods, the one where he grew up and where he had his church, that neighborhood was destroyed by the housing, I'm sorry, by the highways coming through.
I'm not sure if that's the same system, but I know I did studies like, I think a couple years ago on that particular, there's a particular highway, I can't remember the name, maybe you'll know, Suzanne, that there's. you
I'm
have a-
not gonna speak. You're gonna make me go research it, because I'm thinking it's I-20. I'm thinking it's I-20 that runs east and west, because it does go through many Black neighborhoods. I-20 does. So I'm gonna go research that, and I will now have the answer, because you are making me curious. But I'm also I'm thinking about now, not to get off the rails, how we have a lot of gentrification down here in Atlanta proper, because I'm just gonna say, a lot of people don't want to commute anymore. So they're moving back into the city that's been predominantly Black. You know, when they had white flight, they left the city. And now it's just really well, there's no place to go. Rent is high wherever you go. But I'm thinking about Auburn, Sweet Auburn, which is a historically Black business district in Atlanta. And that's where Martin Luther King and a lot of Black business people, the news, the insurance agent, all that was very prosperous. But I have to bring this up because we're talking about how gentrification and housing is affecting people. There's an article that I read yesterday. There's a barber on Sweet Auburn Street who has free food programs for the children in the summertime. And he said, ever since we have these new people coming back to the community, they're constantly calling the police on me. And all I'm doing is feeding the children. They keep talking about how, oh, I don't have a permit, but he's feeding the children. He said, this is our community. All of a sudden we have these transplants, and every time I turn around, they're calling the police. And he said they called the police on him Juneteenth. And so right now he has temporarily shut down the free food, because he had also back to school Juneteenth celebration, also back to school. They arrested him, but then they put him in handcuffs, they let him go. So I think what he's going to have to do is work with Mayor Dickens or whoever's down there at City Hall to get a permit. Point of the matter is, you have walked into a Black community. Just maybe think about this as housing stuff. You walk into a Black community, a Black man is trying to do good things for his community. We have been here when they abandoned us. Now you coming back, buying lofts in a Black neighborhood, and then calling the police on Black business owners. And it's just really, so I mean, it's what's going on right now, happened right now. So it's a lot, you know. I'm very prayerful, and I'm hoping that he will get in contact with the right people to get his permits, because this is what he's trying to service the community. Then when they said they asked, they wanted to talk to the people, keep calling the police on him, nobody wanted to speak. Nobody. So that's cowardly to me. And it's also evil, because this man's doing service for his community. He's feeding the children out of his barbershop, out of he didn't ask y'all for anything. And you all are calling the police. I'm probably trying to force his business out. I figure trying to push the Black people out, you know. It's very sad. These are just a couple of blocks from Ebenezer, historic Ebenezer Church. It's a lot to say when we talk about housing and how it impacts. I remember about 23 years ago, Our Lady of Lourdes. It was a predominantly Catholic school. And they were forcing them out because gentrification was going on a long time in that community. And I remember how the city, even myself, rushed down there to give money to keep that school open. Well, how are you going to let the priest who wants them out? How are you going to let the priest who wants them out, who's working with the structure, count the money? Do you understand? It's like you're going to let your enemy count your money. And he claimed they came up 200, they had $800,000, they wanted $1 million. You mean to tell me you're not going to take 800,000? And he refunded to all of us. I always remember the shock of the woman's face. What had an opportunity to talk to on the news, she collapsed in the hallway. They were trying to, they bust the children out to DeKalb County, which is east of Atlanta. You see what I'm saying? So this housing thing, segregation, everything, it touches us in all kinds of ways. They shut down the projects, which, and that was the first step. So now here we are in 2024, you are calling the police to me, manage your racism. And he said, for over the past year, I've had the police calling me 12 times. That's managing your racism. And they need to charge people who keep calling for non-emergency.
Well, and Suzanne, you're bringing up a modern day example of how these policies support an individual. So I, as an individual, can be racist, right? A policy can't necessarily be racist, but it can support my racism as an individual.
Okay.
And I think what I learned in reading these first few chapters is, man, the federal government has gotten really good at not getting explicit about their racism in their policies. The language that's used allows them to be racist without being racist.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this woman who came in, maybe she doesn't hate Black people or hate brown people, but she's grown up thinking that because she's white, she's better than, or communities that look a certain way are made for her, and not made for you or anyone who looks like you. Because we've also said that, well, we haven't said, we've forced Black communities into projects, into home ownership that is financially, it's cost prohibitive, right? Because the same house being sold to a white person is not being sold at the same price. Maybe it's a little bit closer today, but we'd actually have to look at the data to know and to trust that that's not continually the case. So her internalized racism is just continually fueled by all of these self-serving ideas that we have about Black populations, that they want to live in projects, that they want to live near industrial or you know, liquor stores and all of these places where we've like literally funneled and forced them. We've provided no other options than these places. But as a white person, when you haven't even like thought about that, well, this is what Black and brown people prefer. Not the only option they've been provided. Larry, I want to open it up to you. I know you've come off mute a couple of times. Do you have anything that you want to share?
Well, one thing that came to mind with talking about President Roosevelt, it sounds like President Roosevelt was a politician, that he had his finger in the air and he knew which direction things were going. And he did not want to alienate his white voters who were racists by not protecting them from what it was that they feared, which was the Black people moving into their neighborhood and so forth and so on. So I think maybe as much as a role the oligarchy plays, I think this racism itself is the corrosive element that needs to be eliminated from society. And I still encounter it in my day-to-day interactions with other white people, you know, that claim that, oh, they're not racist at all. But I can see by the way they behave and some of the things they say that they are.
Yeah.
And
Could I chime in on that one? And this is a kind of along the same lines what we've been talking about. And I don't know if you guys have seen the article recently, like this year. This woman, I can't remember exactly where she was. She's a doctor. And I saw this article in the New York Times, of which I have since, I'm no longer subscribed to them because of stuff they've been doing recently. But anyway, her name is Dr. Raven Baxter. And she was closing in on a home until the seller learned that she was Black. And she received a call from her, I guess it's her agent. And he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but she doesn't want to sell the home to you. And it's because you're Black. This is 2024. She has the money, it's a townhouse, but she's denied because she's Black. Kind of goes along with what Larry is saying, is because they basically don't want to give up their space. And it's not giving up their space. It's if the house is available, it should be available to anyone.
It's too bad somebody wasn't taping that. That they could have brought suit.
I think that's the next step right now. I think they're in process.
Also, I was correct. I just researched it right quick. I was correct. It is I-20. And it does go, it goes from east to west. It does go through Black communities. That's areas even where I work, near where I work, and I spent a lot of time in it. It has that was the highway that devastated Black communities.
Right.
And I do remember because Atlanta University Center and what were the projects now not there anymore was if you're going east, it's to the left of you. If you're going west, it's to the right of you. And I understand that community used to be white, and then it had changed over the years. So yeah, it's I-20. I was correct. And I did see that article. I did, yes. So.
Even today, it's happening even today.
I also
Um,
went to Buffalo, New York too, another place where they were thriving. They had a nice neighborhood, and then they did the same thing, put a highway through it. Tulsa, Oklahoma, after the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre, and they put they deliberately put a highway through that too. So it's many communities. I was also looking at, I think somebody was saying, where did this all start? How did it all start? And if you would share the title again, Miss Evelyn, before the end of your book, because I want to see it to write it down. That takes you to chapter 3, Stamped from the Beginning. Do you think, maybe I'm getting it mixed up, correct me if you think I'm wrong. I was also thinking about manifest destiny when you said, this is mine. Would you tie manifest destiny into that title as well? Moving west, I'm gonna take what I want to take.
I've not read that book, so I'm not real sure.
No, it's not a book. It's
just the idea.
It's
that-
an idea. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Also, it brings you to chapter 3, racial zoning. And I take notes a lot when I read, annotate. And I was saying the main point I'm taking from that chapter is terrorism, mob mentality forced African Americans out of the community. It worked against interracial marriages. So that's another thing that also instituted housing segregation, the fact that they started to impose laws. If you look on page 42 in chapter 3, racial zoning, they talked about Montana. Who would have thought Montana had a thriving Black population at the end of the 19th century? But then the policies were already formalized, ordinances, police and organized mob enforced them. Some towns rang bells at sundown for more African Americans to leave. Others posted signs at town boundaries warning them not to remain after sundown. So that's another way that they enforced racial segregation in housing. And it's amazing. I mean, sundown towns, they say still exist now, but I know it existed because of a case in Indiana I won't go into, and I was a newborn. I was like 6 months old when that African American was murdered because she didn't get out of town. She was actually left in Indiana. So it's late as 1968.
And I'm happy that you brought that up, Suzanne, because we as a society, probably all of us here know about sundown towns, right? And you say, well, sundown towns are because of racism. Are they really just because of racism? Or are they because of the policies that were enacted because people were racist and wanted to keep property, money, privilege, in a concentrated white population?
And you know
so
what?
We attribute these very real, very difficult, hard realities to these words that don't really mean a whole lot. It's the actual policies, the things that have been enacted that keep people down or help prop people up that are moving our society. But I know I cut you off, Suzanne.
No, actually, this is really good, like being in a classroom, because you helped to bring it home. I was like, wait a minute, sundown towns, because they have sundown towns in Vermont and all over the place. And you brought it home. It's not because, let's flip the switch, Suzanne. It's not because the people are racist. It's because, and yes, that's what the chapter is driving home too, the racist policies. I see Melissa's hand. I'm gonna shut up. But yes, thank you for giving me an episphany. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, don't shut up, Suzanne.
You're
You're giving me a lot to think about. I think it was interesting, Maya, when you did bring up the policy in and of itself, because I think that it's really, I mean, I don't know any racist who's going to say, I'm racist, you know, and I know a handful of them, at least in my family. And I think that it's like, until we can address those implicit biases, that we don't even, when I say we, I mean like white people don't even know that they exist. I mean, and I remember I have been fortunate enough, at least from my early adulthood on. I mean, because I grew up in a super conservative, rural, white Indiana, you know, area. And it was this weird dichotomy because, you know, my mother was from, well, first she lived in very ethnic neighborhoods in Akron, and then she moved to the Southwest, where she was always just part of a lot of different kinds of people. And so it was never, that's just what her life was. And then when she married my dad and moved to Indiana and had this like big time whiteness shoved down her throat, you know, and she was always considered like the earthy one. That's the title they gave her. But at any rate, so it was this odd dichotomy that I grew up in, like knowing, you know, somebody would say something that was just inherently racist, and my mom would call them on it, and they're like, oh, well, you're just being silly. But I think once I was fortunate enough to start addressing some of my own biases, that you're like, oh, that's, you know, like I grew up thinking that. And it's not until you realize it's wrong. And then you're like, oh, yeah, that policy isn't right either. You know, so I mean, you start building a bigger picture, and you start, at least for me anyway, I can start forming questions that that are nobody's responsibility but my own to answer, to find the answers to. But you know, it's just helpful. Whereas before, you know, and I still think back in this community that I grew up in, there's still a lot of people that still hold those same beliefs, you know, because they they've limited themselves, you
And if
know.
there's no one around to challenge them,
Right. Yeah.
how would you
Yeah.
ever change your mind?
And if everybody looks like you and nobody's challenging you, and you know, yeah. So but it's interesting to connect those policies with the bias.
Yeah, and I think too, you're bringing up to mind another theme I saw in the book, in that like racist housing policy is not something that we can easily say like, okay, well, we said that Black people weren't allowed in restaurants today, but then tomorrow you're allowed in the restaurant. Doesn't mean that every restaurant's going to let you in, but the rule is everyone is allowed now. If we're to change policies that are you know, racist without being explicitly racist today in housing, it's not going to be for another 10 or 15 years where those policies will actually affect this generation, the next generation, and build what we've allowed white populations to enjoy for all this time. So it's not a one for one. That what I learned is that like this, the housing discrimination and injustice is a root, if not the biggest root of inequality and inequity in the United States. Lena, I know your hand's been up for
Okay.
quite a while, and then Suzanne will
No,
pop
I
over
was
to
just about to say Lena's hand is up. I want to have time, but she said something. Hey, Lena.
First of all, I want to apologize for being late because I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to be there on time," and then life happens and hashtag
Thank you
facility
for
life.
joining us. We
But
appreciate you.
yes, the honestly, okay, I was born in the late 70s, 77. So even me, the first time I picked up this book, I made it through a couple of chapters, and I got mad. I got angry, and I'm like, these are just words on the paper, but it opened my eyes up to so many. I couldn't even get through the first time. So I got encouraged to finish listening to the rest of the book because I know we were going to be getting together and discussing it. So I made it through. And like again, not to jump to the end of the story or instances after instances, like everything that you guys are saying, even when looking at different aspects of like the social isolation and everything that's going on now, housing, the children who went through the pandemic and everything, it really made me open up my eyes that okay, this is just like yeah, like the top of the iceberg because okay, housing, what stems from the housing? The schools, the school districts. And when I did a talk in one of my other groups on Facebook, and I really looked at the numbers, the populations, the demographics, the Title IV schools, they were all in a certain area. And then you look historically, those areas have always been served or residential areas of poor whites, Latino, African American population. Looking at the county as a whole, it's almost like we're seeing white flight again because now they're building bigger, larger, extremely extravagant houses in the western part of the county. And so now what's happening? They're building a new school. They did not want to have just a community school. So that means you don't want to say busing, but in essence, it's going to be busing because again, they're not going to have just a school in one neighborhood and only those children go to that school. And so like parents are getting concerned. They're like, oh, my child's going to have to be on a bus for like 20, 25 minutes just to get to school, just so they can make sure that the numbers are right kind of thing. So, yeah, even me, and I'm thinking, okay, so I was in kindergarten in like the early 80s, seeing like, I felt like we had a good diverse classroom, but looking back to even when my sister was in school 4 years before that, it was like completely different and how quick the demographics of an area can change or flip flop because again the area that we moved from the city to the county in, it was still predominantly white, but some of the black families were moving in more. But like fast forward 10 years, it was a predominantly Hispanic school. And it's like just to see how the diversity of the school has changed, the diversity of the neighborhoods have changed. And it's like again, if we don't have the knowledge or even know that we can ask these questions or even where to go to get more information, our lack of knowledge is still going to keep us in the same situations and almost still perpetuating those same federal laws that were instilled years ago. Because like you guys have all said, nobody's asking the questions, nobody's challenging it. It's just like status quo. But I have hope. I always have hope that if we get some younger people in these like local legislation positions, state level, federal level, and again, hopefully reflected in the White House again, things won't be able to change because, like you said, these mentalities are in they're in deep. And again, oh, I'm not racist, but I'm a Christian in this, but I'm like, okay, how many documentaries about early Black church have you heard? They didn't even tell you about the best parts in the Bible of how the slaves got free. So again, it's like, it is really deep. And so it's not just, oh, it just happened 25 years ago. It's so deep. And I'm like, yeah, my mind was blown. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, I had to put it down, but I feel better now. And I have some new knowledge. So again, it just changes the way I view things, the type of advice that I give to my children, everything. So yeah, definitely a
Yeah.
learning opportunity. Definitely.
Thank you, Lena. And you're
Can I
right.
say-
It's infuriating. Everything is infuriating. Miss Evelyn, before I go on, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think maybe Suzanne started talking about the racial zoning. And I think if we stop there, we're going to be stuck in understanding or not understanding what encompasses the racial zoning. Why were these folks allowed and those folks were not allowed? And why are we stuck today in certain uh, geographical locations like Chicago, South Side? And why? And it's all encompassing actually. And it goes, according to the book, it goes to the economic zoning. What's encompassed in the economic zoning? And then the industrial zoning, and then the federal loan discrimination, that part of it, it's all grouped together. And it's all purposely grouped together. The policies are set in place specifically to keep people, I heard this a little bit growing up, to keep people in their places, and their places were not in segregated, integrated communities, just to keep people separated. And the industrial zoning, if you guys can remember, I mean, you don't even have to have read this book to understand what happens in one of those communities that Lena's talking about, if it's going to be highly Hispanic brown or highly African-American brown. What's going to happen to the industrial stuff? Where is it going to go? It goes to the predominant Black community. It's dumped there. And what does it cause? A lot of sickness. But it's never, ever, there's never a place for it to be dumped in a predominantly white neighborhood. And that's policy. It's designed that way. So even when you have the white flight, was there any industrial dumping before the white flight? Nope. But after the white flight, was there industrial dumping? Yep, designed that way. So there's just a lot, and this was like really, I found it quite helpful to really rethink racial zoning. Racial, I understand that part, but the zoning. So you're going to design a place for me to remain with less than. You're going to design a place for me to have, when I go outside to mow my lawn, to breathe in all your dump, whatever that might be. And you're going to design a policy for me with a job, sometimes equal to my white friends, to have my loan denied because I'm Black. That's what I'm talking about. It's designed from the beginning. As we were wired that way from the beginning. And it's all about the caste system. I mean, I grew up in Texas, in East Texas, to where it was, the caste system was like, it was so blatant, and yet it was so subtle. And yet you just had to accept it, you know? And so it was a great lesson for me to know that I don't want to, I want to do something about it. I don't want to play into the evil, but I want to do something about it. You know, and one of the things that I did, and I was 18 years old, risky. And I just remember, you were talking about the Black restaurants. I remember having to go through the back door of the restaurant. And one day, I'm going to say this, one day I got sick and tired of going through the back door. And I told my friends, I said, I'm going to go through the front door. I don't know what's going to happen. And I just remember them saying, that girl, you're going to get killed. I said, I'm going through the front door. I am never going to go to the back door of this restaurant ever again. I'm going through the front door. I did, had my food served, and I was afraid to eat it because I'm thinking, I don't know what they put in it. You know, in the back, I felt a little bit safe, eat the food, but oh my gosh, I'm the only Black person in this part of the restaurant, but I'm staying. And in that particular restaurant, I never went through the back door again. Sometimes you got to make a move to make a change. I was scared to death because I've never been tall, and I was a little girl, like thinner than I am now. But I felt like, you know what? I'm just tired. I'm tired. My parents can never go through the front door. I'm going so they can go through the front door. And I did. Next time my friends went, my parents went, my mom went. So sometimes you just got to be in that position, I guess, to where you feel like, okay, they know who I am. You know, they served me in the back. I guess it's gonna be the same folks serving me in the front. I don't know, but it was. But I was still scared to eat the food. So yeah, I think we'll just educate ourselves on the different kinds of racial stuff. We can have better conversations to help other people. Because this is a very small group, but we're now the messengers to share, to share hope for other people that are still kind of like caught into in the struggle of everything that we're encompassed with in this world of discrimination and yeah.
I love that story. I was thinking, people think that racism is being called the N-word. You know what I'm saying? They think it's a verbal. And I'm like, no, it's very ingrained. It's very systematic. It's very slick. But I think Lena was talking about school and we're talking about housing. Where I teach, undergoing gentrification. I can see it now with the nice stores and we got a nice Publix, which I'm excited about. I stop at before I go to work sometime. Then Publix, my mouth hung open when not that Kroger, not that you would know, but when I went to that neighborhood, I just decided to let me turn left. Let me see what's over here. My mouth dropped open because I was looking at this very established neighborhood, brand new, $500,000 homes. And I'm like, wow, just that whole corridor. But if you could just see where I work and what it used to look like. So but my school is gradually becoming more white. Each year I see more white kids. Each year more and more white. So I figure maybe another three years, maybe it'll be predominantly white. But what's interesting is the designation of the school in the neighborhood is called a high poverty school. And my husband said to me, Suzanne, how is this a high, and we get a certain amount of money for working a high poverty school. And so he says, Suzanne, why is this a high poverty school? I said, because it's still predominantly Black, even though we have some middle class Black children who go there, whose parents are lawyers, doctors, and work for the school system. It doesn't matter. You're Black. They decided that you are still high needs. And so that's interesting to me because, and when my children were in school at another county back in the early 2000s, we were homeowners. I've always been homeowners since my son was 2 years old, homeowners. The area was predominantly Black because down here in Atlanta, Atlanta area, we are still very segregated, but we have nice homes. So, and the school, when they write articles about this thriving school, which was destroyed politically, this thriving, predominantly Black school, they always called the kids impoverished. These impoverished children, I would look around and say, but we're homeowners, these kids don't get free lunch, and my kids didn't get free lunch. We're homeowners. But I had to remember, it doesn't matter. If the homes are nice, they're well kept, the school is thriving, as long as we're Black, we are considered, in this area, since we're talking about housing, we are considered high poverty. Low, just everything negative. And I know from raising my kids and their upbringing and what they experience, I'm like, what are they talking about? So all that, like Lena was saying, runs into the color of law and housing. So, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
there's a couple of things that have come to mind. One I have totally lost, but maybe it'll come back to me.
Mhm.
But I'm glad we're spending a lot of time on zoning, because I feel like, and I think Melissa, you had asked a question, in the chat, how do we stay positive? I think it's by educating ourselves even further on our own individual locale and those zoning rules. So zoning not only forced Black populations towards industrial development zones or created those zones thereafter, those populations were forced to whatever geographic area, but racially driven zoning laws are alive and well today. I just listened to a podcast yesterday. It was a Science Versus podcast. So if you're into funky science stuff and like to ask questions and know why, you should probably check out Science Versus if you're into podcasts. but this one was titled "Who Killed Affordable Housing?" And there is a woman, her name is Sarah Bronin, and I'll actually bring up, I have her website up here. We can actually watch a quick video on what they're doing, but before I do that, they are, in a nutshell, they're basically taking all of the zoning laws across the United States and putting it into an interactive map. So you can see what areas nearby you across the United States, how they're zoned and what they're zoned for. Specifically, so they kind of started with the state of Connecticut. 91% of Connecticut is zoned for single family homes, which means you can't build apartment buildings, you can't build high rises, you can't build any housing for populations in need. In 91% of Connecticut, it's zoned for single family homes only, which we know, or maybe we're learning today, single family home ownership is skewed towards the white American. One thing I learned in that podcast too is there's specific zoning laws that say things like, well, if you're going to build a new apartment building, for every studio apartment, you have to have 3 parking spaces in your parking structure. What purpose does requiring 3 parking spaces for 1 studio apartment serve, other than to restrict the type of people who can move in, because you can't even build that apartment there? No company is going to build an apartment building with 3 times the amount of parking spaces. That's just wasted money for them. So again, we're coming back to the economy. We're coming back to capitalism. We're coming back to the not explicitly racist rules that are still thriving today, being enacted by local governments, that reduce publicly available housing, not just for Black people, not just for Brown Americans and Black Americans, for everyone. Like, we're in a housing crisis across America, but because we've let these racist policies proliferate year after year after year, and we've done really nothing to combat them, we're all suffering for it. We're all paying more in rent. We all have less ability. There's rules for single family homes that say you have to have 2 acres on top of the single family home, even in urban areas. How is anyone going to build a single family home with 2 acres in the middle of Chicago? Well, you aren't. You just can't. So we have a housing crisis, but we've got all of these policies, right? We've talked about the loans. We've talked about restrictive covenants, right? We didn't talk about those specifically, but Miss Evelyn brought them up. I'm not going to sell to you because you're a Black person. And just because like that's not explicitly put into language now, doesn't mean that it wasn't explicitly put into language for years and years and years. Realtors, home builders, homeowners associations, they all had this language that restricted certain groups from being able to participate in the American dream. Zoning laws, challenging them and changing them, are one of the ways that we can actually do something about this crisis. And if we want to take a few minutes, I'm just going to show you a video from Sarah Bronin and the National Zoning Atlas. There we go. So let me share my screen. So this is just a little bit about what the National Zoning Atlas is doing. And let me know if you can hear okay.
Zoning plays a huge role in the quality of life and the well-being. as well as the sustainability of our environment and local economies. The National Zoning Atlas is an awesome dynamic research collaborative that involves almost 60 institutions across a couple dozen project teams working at the state or regional level. We're collecting parcel-specific information about how all of our communities across the United States treat housing in particular. The reason that that matters for housing policy and ultimately for reforms that will make housing more affordable is that we do not have a good understanding of how zoning enacted at the local level actually functions. We don't know whether it's minimum lot sizes or minimum parking requirements or maximum height caps that do the most damage when it comes to our ability to meet a housing shortage that affects every single community across America. The single family only zone is more prominent in the United States than virtually any other country that has been studied. And so it's that separation of uses that actually leads to less economically stable communities. Because instead of mixing land uses and instead of mixing types of housing, we create communities that are purely dependent on one type of housing. Across the state of Connecticut, 91% of land is zoned to allow single family zoning, while only 2% of land is zoned to allow 4 or more family zoning as of right. We do see that there are significant correlations in Connecticut between zoning and social and economic outcomes.
Connecticut is a very segregated state by both race and class, and our zoning practices are really good at continuing and perpetuating that segregation so that we have significant pockets of wealth and we have significant pockets of poverty. Here in Hartford, 90% of the population is Black and Latino. You can go one town or two towns to the west, and it's the direct opposite where it's 90% white. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens by the historical legacy of zoning.
Everything that determines where you end up in life starts with where you're born, right? It starts with where you live. Education maps onto housing, the environment maps onto housing, your community is determined by the kind of housing that you have. People understanding what zoning is and how it works in a comparative fashion is an essential prerequisite to creating the kind of competitive environment where jurisdictions are actually incentivized to have more permissive zoning, to be a place that is easy to build in and that people want to build in and therefore to live in.
Zoning codes are local. They're very hard to read. They're often assembled across multiple different sources. They're just not the kinds of regulations that you can easily understand. That's why the work we do is so important. It's because we're trying to take things that have been in the dark just because of the way that they're assembled and put them into terms that the public can understand so that policymakers and people and advocates all around can do work on them.
You can really simply select, single family housing and multifamily housing. It'll show up in, different colors. So it'll become really apparent if your jurisdiction is simply not allowing the kind of density that other jurisdictions around you are.
Showing a zoning atlas, whether it's an elected official, town official, neighborhood person, here's land use across the state. It's single family housing. The entire map is purple. And all of a sudden you switch it and say, here's where you can have apartments or townhouses or smaller homes. There's absolutely that light bulb moment where you can't hide from those consequences of those decisions. Connecticut, to really respond to the kind of economic inequality we have, the racial segregation, the concerns about climate change, we just need to change. We need to do that through land use reform. That's been a really powerful, I'll even say radicalizing experience for a lot of people, not just to say, wow, we really need to make changes, but also more importantly to say, I can be the change. I can actually help do this.
We've already seen the impact of National Zoning Atlas projects in local communities and states around the country. Out in Montana, in part because of the data collection of the Frontier Institute through the Montana Zoning Atlas, they're seeing the highest number of housing-related bills proposed in the state legislature ever. The National Zoning Atlas is democratizing, demystifying, and digitizing our nation's 30,000 or more zoning codes.
Thanks for taking a look at that. This tab up here. Is my screen sharing?
We didn't see it, we just heard it.
Okay, apologies, y'all.
That's okay.
So I will actually share the video out on the chat. And then you can take a peek with video as well. No. Okay. So here is what the zoning atlas looks like right now. So you could hear from the video that, you know, they focused a lot on the work that they've done in Connecticut. But they have done work in other areas across the United States as well. So this indicates to me that they've gathered a lot of information around Muskegon and Grand Rapids in Michigan. I know we have a ton of zoning laws and rules here in Chicago. They just haven't gotten to us yet. So I think one of the calls to action today is get involved in your local community, figure out if there's any zoning issues. Suzanne, I would be actually like super interested because you have that direct correlation with kind of watching the gentrification of your school. How have zoning laws changed? Have they changed? Are people using certain laws to help drive that gentrification? That would be super interesting to know. And then for those of us who want to advocate for different housing solutions, for supporting the unhoused, to create areas, reduce those restrictions, right? Like, there's no need for a single family home to require 2 acres in the middle of Chicago. Not that that's real here yet. I still have my own research to do, but you understand what I'm saying. There's tangible things that we can do. We can get involved with the National Atlas. We can find maybe the local chapter in our area that is supporting their data collection. But we can just do our own research. And, as we discussed earlier, spreading the word, spreading the understanding that, where people live is not simply a choice that they've made. It's rather a policy that has driven them to that location. And I think we've all kind of said, maybe, or a few of us have noted, living in Chicago, you can see, right? The names of our neighborhoods, right, will tell you kind of the population that you can expect there. Okay, Pilsen, that's predominantly Hispanic. Ukrainian Village, I can expect mostly white people there. There's areas, the South Side, right? You can expect a certain type of person to be living there. That is by design. The Chicago Housing Authority, the FHA, the HOCL, they've all created those. It's not people choosing, but rather people making the best with the options that they have.
It's funny you say that because I've never been to Chicago, but I know about the South Side. That's predominantly Black. I was just thinking about we have a lot of land down here in Georgia, so things are a little bit different where I am. We have a lot of land. The downside is climate change, so you're destroying a lot of the environment, but at the same time, they're building a lot of housing. South Fulton County, talking about how things are broken down. Atlanta, the city of Atlanta is in Fulton County. Fulton County is the largest county in Georgia. South of Atlanta, South Fulton County is Black. Just hands down is Black. North of Atlanta, hands down, white. And I always found it just so interesting how the city of Atlanta so perfectly divided us. Also, I was in DC a few weeks ago and I was watching Good Morning DC. And they were talking about Arlington, Virginia. We talking about zoning. They're talking about, and I'm so curious to know whether this community is predominantly Black. I'm just curious. They have these homes that sit on acre lots, and they're looking at changing the zoning because it's zoned for 1 acre lots, and these are old homes. they're looking at rezoning it, so therefore they could probably take those homes and then turn around and build duplexes and triplexes on these 1 acre lots. I was like, oh, wow. They said we are looking at changing the zoning. It's in Arlington. And this is a neighborhood. I mean, if it's a predominantly white neighborhood, and maybe it has to be older white people who have died off, who are dying, or and the children just don't want the homes. I'm just really curious just to see, just y'all are bold. That's bold to me to take these established neighborhoods and say, we're gonna take these homes and we're gonna go ahead. And they're looking at rezoning and build duplexes, triplexes, even four, I think they said quadplexes. I was like, wow, wow. Jay said, well, this is how we're gonna solve the housing problem. I was like, wow.
And
Yeah.
from what we've learned, it sounds like they're probably trying to force Black and brown populations into those houses.
Oh, yes. That's why I'm trying to figure out what the demographics is now. Now, where I live, these homes right here, my homes, I've been here about 17 years. All this neighborhood is zoned for homes to sit on 1/2 acre lots because we had the land to do it. Just down the road from me, I didn't know how dense those woods were. When you're driving along, you just say, oh, these are trees. They have cleared it out. It is so we had a lot of deer and stuff. My husband said he hadn't really seen them in the last few years. He is, not the way he saw it earlier when we came almost 20 years ago, but you should see it's just all this land is cleared out. One of our neighbors said they're building 54 homes on 1/2 acre lots. I could tell you it's probably going to be predominantly Black because where I am, it's so perfectly, this is a Black side of town. If you go maybe about 2 miles up, 2 miles away from me, you will see townhomes that are being built for $300,000. I think it's a ripoff, but just comparing my house to that. But I have to understand rent. Then but the thing that I'm seeing is population density, because they have built some nice apartments as well. So I will look at the zoning laws. So it looks like they're trying to meet housing expectations because these are working people, teachers, social workers, you know what I'm saying, work for Delta. So I do see it, but now I'm looking at the destruction of the land and population density because believe me,
Right.
we have a lot of land down here.
Is there population growth?
Yes, population growth too. People still coming here. Yes, population growth as well. Yeah, population growth, but still just the density. And it is sad to see the destruction, because
Is that really needed?
huh? Well, it's
Is it
needed.
really needed?
It's needed because the population of the Atlanta area is growing. So it's needed. It's just sad. It's like you're building homes. But the rent is still high.
Right.
But yet you are destroying the environment to do it's almost like it's like a trade-off. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder sometimes though, I've heard of this, and I don't know if that's the case there, that businesses actually will be complicit in a good way of building homes for their employees.
You know what? That was some of the discussion as well, because I'm not far from the airport. I can get to the airport. We're right by the expressway. It's a pretty nice area. At night you could hear the humming of the cars, you could hear the train, the railroad. But they are looking at that too, because I'm about 15 minutes from the airport. So yeah, but also I wanted to bring up, if you all want to see anything on Netflix, want to take a break from the politics, because we're talking about housing, I am just so blown away with Owning Manhattan. It's on Netflix, Owning Manhattan on Netflix. It's what they're selling these condos and stuff for, and people talk about, yeah, I'm gonna give you cash for it. I'm like, what kind of job y'all, what? It makes me think about the disparity in the country. I mean, people like, yes, I'm selling this, and the agent could get like $200,000 commission. That means you don't have to work for the rest of the year, really. And these people are like, yes, I'm gonna give you $5 million for this penthouse. I'm like, what? $5 million cash. I'm like, so it made me think about the disparity in this country, the money behind the political power in this country. But I would say check out Owning Manhattan. It is mind-blowing, since we're talking about housing.
Well, and you've got me thinking now, Miss Evelyn, now that because I've read those articles about Amazon. I read something about Costco. It's either starting to talk about or or, you know, purchasing land to start building employee homes on.
Mhm.
And then I'm thinking about Larry's comment at the start of our book club about, you know, the fact that we basically live in an oligarchy. Is it good to house people? Yeah. But how far then are we away from the company town, right? How far then away are we from, well, okay, well, you live in Amazon town, and then you use your Amazon bucks to buy your food, and you send your kids to the Amazon school, and eventually it's just going to be these little communities that are solely created and supported by and supporting individual corporations.
Hmm.
It's a good thing to house people, but then my brain goes to, well, we've done this before, right? We did it with mining towns, and oof, we know what happened there. So I don't know. It's a slippery slope, I think.
Yes, it is. And yeah, in conjunction with what we're saying today, the way some people want to run the country, I don't want to get into that, but
Mhm.
I wonder if that's also part of that, what Suzanne is talking about. Is that part of it, to where they're gonna build all these houses, but who's building all these houses and for what reason?
Right.
Yes, it all seems to be, like you're saying, kind of connected, doesn't it? And we're hoping that
Mhm.
that's the case.
Hoping-
Yeah.
What about the law that was just passed about housing? The Supreme Court has made it illegal to be homeless. Did y'all hear about that? Did y'all see that?
Not surprised though.
Well,
And about
now, correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne. Have they made it illegal, or have they said each individual municipality can make their own rules on how they deal with houseless people?
You know what? They have said the Supreme, you know what? Let me go back and look, because it has to do with Oregon Pass. But I know they have floated in Georgia as well, that if you're homeless, that we will ticket you, like if you're sleeping on the street,
Right.
we will
Right.
ticket you. And if you don't pay your ticket, which is insane because you're homeless or sleeping on the sidewalk, we're gonna put you in jail.
Sounds like Jim Crow.
Right. And so it came out of this case of Oregon's Pass, this town where they criminalize homelessness. So they
Mhm.
said you can't even give them pillows, you can't give them blankets. I mean, just denying them basic humanity. It might be individual, I'm not sure, because I know Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, told the police, she gave an order, do not act on the homeless. So it seems to be a law nationally. Do not act, she's saying don't act on homeless, we're not gonna ticket them, we're not gonna move them. But also, it also falls in line with, them having these encampments where they really moved on it because of the pro-Palestinian protests. Well, now if they set up camp and stuff like that, that could be considered homeless. So they're trying to be broad
Right.
about. So, but I think it's insane that you are going to ticket people who are sleeping on the sidewalk with what money they're going to pay. So actually, it's going to work in their favor, because then they're going to go to jail and have a real bed. You know what I'm saying? Have a bed to sleep on. At least they'll be out of the element. So it's interesting. I also say this. It stays with me. About a year ago, I went to work in the church garden. So I remember waiting for somebody to eat something in the morning. That's when we're supposed to meet. And my church has a lot of property. It's nice in the back, facing the field and woods. Like I said, we have a lot of land down here. And I just pulled up. I looked to my right and I saw a child in a car looking out the window, nose pressed. I'm like, Then I looked to my left. I saw somebody else stretched out in the car. I did not know, talking about the state of homelessness in this country. They're using the church parking lot, which I don't care. I don't mind, to sleep somewhere that's safe, that you cannot see it from the road. And when the person woke up to my right and realized I was there, it's like they hurried up and left. I mean, And I just said, oh my God, people are using the back of this parking lot to be safe to sleep at night. That was heartbreaking about a year ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And no one, I mean, I shouldn't say no one. Most people don't want to be houseless, unhoused, right? Most of us get there because of circumstances that we either have no control over, or whatever it might be. And yet, and to your point, Suzanne, if you can't afford to live anywhere, what is the point of a ticket? Well, in municipalities, let's say you have a prison nearby, right? Doesn't it benefit those prison officials to have a full prison all the time? So whether the Supreme Court said yay or nay, or sent it down to the individual municipalities, it's no good. Housing should be a human right. But it is not. And I think I'm not going to harp on it because there's lots of things that we can point to, reasons why we shouldn't vote for that other guy in this upcoming election. Project 25 has many, but housing is also, so, you know, when we talk about what people are motivated by in this election and every election, what's the number one issue? It's the economy, right? No one has enough money in their pocket, except for the people who already have enough money in their pockets. And housing, I mean, housing is my biggest expense. I'm super privileged in where I get to live and that I get to live alone as a woman in 2024. And that's really messed up. But it is an extreme privilege that I have. And I honor it every single day. I think about it every single day, especially because I live right next to Grand Park and I see unhoused people every single day, just trying to get by, just trying to get through.
Yeah.
And I bet if they could have a secure home or bed to sleep on, they would much rather prefer that. But most of the programs that we have available here in Chicago, they are solely based on they're like Christian funded, right? So there's requisites that these people must meet. And if you don't jive with that, then where else are you going to go? You're going to go sleep on the street if you don't want to be proselytized to. So all that is to say, if someone is coming at us and saying, well, the economy is terrible and you know, I might as well give old Orange Menace a try again. He's got no plan. He's got absolutely no plan for housing. But Biden is at least asking the suburban areas to loosen their zoning restrictions. He's actually asking them to do the one thing that we actually can do to help open up housing availability to everyone. Now that's going to force a lot of people to confront their own biases and racism because the people that they've never had to interact with in their lives, unless they chose to do so, you know, that's integration.
Yeah.
But if we needed any other reasons to help support Joe. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that, I'm sorry, I want to say this. Personally, I think there's something nefarious going on, but with the Democratic Party, because this man had one bad night debate, and you all are beating a drum about replacing him. I said to myself, you want to fail because you want to replace him. You're not going to be able. I was thinking about how it's going to affect us grassroots people out here. How am I going to talk to people about supporting a new candidate we're not familiar with if you won't move him? It's all going to fall apart. That's why I think some of these talking heads are nefarious. They've been bought. Fortunately, because I read the comments on Facebook and Occupy Democrat, people are still supporting him. You know, they're still supporting Joe Biden because I think it's just crazy and
Suzanne,
really there's nothing they could do.
Suzanne, can we kind of put closure on the topic and then I will we can continue that conversation off of recording.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But before we do that though, Maja, do you have a CTA? Or
Yeah.
Kind of set it, and then offline I want to share something else too.
Right. So, you know, if you haven't already, look into your local zoning laws. We'll share out the National Atlas Project. So, you know, if you do have a local chapter that's kind of already up and running, you can for sure volunteer with them. But just being educated on what's happening in your own locality so you can speak with your neighbors about you know, I have an older person who, unfortunately, she didn't win this past go around, but she's a real estate agent. So she understood and was advocating for additional zoning reworking and just kind of tackling the housing crisis here in Chicago. And this was, 2 years ago, right? So it was a problem then, was a problem, has been a problem forever. It's going to continue being a problem, but we can educate our Congress people. We can, ask them to look into issues. We can educate ourselves. So that's first and foremost. And then, again, just spreading the word. We've got a really important election coming up, obviously. So there's only one option of someone who's going to be in office, who's going to allow our democracy to continue and allow us to try and tackle these really, really big issues. So that's the CTA for today. And let me know if you have any questions or concerns. And Larry, I actually have a Netflix. I have a Netflix documentary to recommend to you that I'll put in the chat as well. That's it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Maja. Really appreciate it. This was so impactful and educational and mind-boggling at the same time, and a call to action at the same time. We cannot be passive. We've got to be proactive in it, and I believe that we can. So I appreciate the time you've taken just to put this together and for everyone's conversation in it, and everything's been helpful. So thank you.